welcome back to Inside the Session. I hope you've been having a great time, a great life. If not, do something about it. If you can't, change the way you think about it. If you can't change the way you think about it, that means sit down and relax. It's going to be okay. On today's episode, we are excited, or I'm excited. I can't speak for everybody, but we are excited to share perspectives, lived experiences related to the LGBTQIA community. And part of this discussion, this conversation is exposure to learn more, to talk to people, to hear from people who live a life that is very unique, meaning different. And that's everybody. For whatever reason, we find ways to separate, isolate, discriminate against people who are different. So this show is part of exposing people to different things. So if you notice from episode 1 all the way to where we are now in episode 5, we're talking about differences. So Cheryl, please dive in, jump in. How you doing? How you been?
So I'm Dr. Cheryl Fisher. I'm the director of the online Master's in Clinical Counseling campus. And today I'm super excited for our guest to help us do a deep dive into the specific issues and needs of the LGBTQIA plus community.
Yes. So what I would like for you to do is to introduce yourself, because y'all can do it way better than we can. So if you could introduce yourself, your connection, affiliation with Alliant, anything you want to share, just to let the listeners know who we have in the building today.
My name is Wiorkowski, and my background's educational psychology. I did my dissertation on the needs of people with autism in higher education. You know, really the transition from high school to college, because there wasn't much at the time. Here I'm an academic advisor in the school psychology program with PPS credential, which is gets them ready to be a professional school psychologist in a district.
I am Dr. Elizabeth Waters. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the director of our online PhD in couple and family therapy and a core faculty for our MA and PhD program. I'm also the co-founder and therapy director of a local nonprofit here in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'm located, called The Well Mental and Spiritual Care, where we do a lot of integrated healthcare and try to break down the barriers between mental health care and spiritual well-being, especially for BIPOC and LGBTQIA2S plus communities.
Awesome. Okay, do we want to talk about what's in the news, Jason?
Yes.
This is why I'm so excited. And by the way, Dr. Waters, I have to admit, I was kind of scoping the web and looked at your wonderful program. And I'm so excited for all the work that you're doing on the East Coast, where I'm at.
Yes. Oh, I didn't realize we were both East Coast.
Annapolis, Maryland, folks.
Awesome.
I am officially, but like time zone, I'm Eastern, but I live outside of Detroit. So
See, so we've got only one West Coaster, 2 West Coasters, 3.
Look at
if we
this.
talk about our producers. Look at how diverse we are, how similar we are.
Yes.
Well, this is really a poignant topic, and something that I think is just so important given the headlines that I pulled up just this morning, just like half hour ago. So some of the major headlines is looking at the major federal rollbacks of funding, grant funding, eliminating for gender affirming care, transgender military ban reinstatement, state level surge of anti-LGBTQI plus legislation. I have 2 pages of headlines just in the last year that came up in the last half hour. So I am just really anxious to sit back and listen to you tell us more about what you're seeing and what we can do about it and all of that stuff.
Absolutely. So we're looking at this from a global perspective. This show is Inside the Session, so we're looking at behind the scenes within a therapeutic setting. This could be for clients, potential clients, for helping professionals. This is for all. So we're looking at gaining more insight, more information. How do I be informed? How do I approach? How do I connect? How do I deal with me if my own biases, beliefs, stereotypes? How do I overcome that? So we'd love to hear from the source of different ways people can interact, can connect with people.
yeah, I stay away from the news, so that's all new to me. I look at some of the mental health aspects, but not. Yeah, I just can't. I know I'm supposed to stay well informed, and I can't anymore.
So real quick. This I need the listeners to know. This is a part of healthy boundaries. This is protecting your peace. We respect it. This is the show for you. You're in good company. You're in good company.
Yeah, I think for me, y'all covered like a lot of really big pieces of news updates, and then also like how do we help folks come along if they're bumping into internalized biases and maybe held homophobic or transphobic beliefs. And so I'm just wondering where would you like us to start, because there are many pathways we could take.
And Liz is a therapist. I'm a researcher, that's what I'd prefer doing. So it's got real different perspectives.
So I like where you are. I want to start with the heart. You mentioned, biases as well, those stereotypes and beliefs and identity. We could start there and work from the inside out.
One of the things that I found was kind of like internalized bias, in the sense that everybody was really supportive of me when I transitioned, except I would get little comments like, when you get on testosterone a lot of the time, you gain a lot of weight, which is weird to me because cis men lose weight when they get on testosterone, but whatever. So I started, and it moves, right? So it moves from where it normally is down to your stomach, because that's where, men tend to carry weight. I gained a lot of weight. I just lost 60 pounds. But at the time I had been thin, right? And I had someone say, oh, so you're going to take care of that eventually. Like that was a failing in what I was doing or something. And that's more what I get. I don't get a lot of, just straight out, you're a terrible person kind of stuff, but I've gotten a lot of the kind of sideways stuff. And I'm sure I'm going to think of something else while you guys are talking. And I'm not out, although I think one of my neighbors has figured it out, but I'm not out here. I moved here for a couple of reasons, but one of them was to get out of Texas because it's not safe. And my dad passed away, and so I was able to really move. I had thought about moving up here for a long time because I have a good friend that lives here from like elementary school. I'm sure Liz will talk about safety later, but that's one of the things that has really been on my mind. I have a basement, and I was trying to decide, if ICE shows up or something, because now we're on the list for ICE. So if they show up or something, I can go in the basement, right? Because there's one door. And then I thought, well, there's one door. This is a problem, and it's an enclosed space, right? I have cats, if they're in an enclosed space, you can catch them. So I got a second thing installed so that I can go in and get out. And it's like, I don't really like that I have to think about these things, and I'm lucky in the sense that I'm a trans man, right? Because trans women, really, it's a lot worse, and it's much harder for them to pass because, unfortunately, if you're 6'2" and built like a linebacker, hormones help with that. And you can get some surgeries, but all the surgeries are incredibly expensive. So, it's much harder to pass. There's a lady here that cuts hair, and I knew she was trans immediately because of something like that, and so I'm lucky in the sense that, I can hide, but a lot of people can't. And I just hate that I have to think about those kinds of things.
Thank you for sharing. And it's more, we're going to go in that space because you brought up a lot of layers, and I definitely want us to talk about it. So yeah, Liz, your thoughts.
Yeah, I think I'll start from a similar place of Winter, of like what formed me, which I was born and raised in California till I was 11. Then I was also in Texas for 13 years. And I went to a conservative Christian university for my undergrad and master's in West Texas, before then moving up to Iowa and working at the LGBTQ clinic for 4 years, but really working in a lot of rural spaces in my time in Texas and then Iowa before coming here to North Carolina. And so when I think about how to help people confront the internalized stereotypes and biases that they hold, I always think about proximity. I think Brene Brown says, like, it's hard to hate people up close, right? And I think that's very true for our queer folks in our communities. Once you know someone, like a lot of times, especially in a therapeutic setting and in my personal life, when I came out as non-binary and then pansexual, polyamorous, and then autistic and ADHD, all kind of finding my way like later in life, I had a lot of folks that, like, as soon as they started to associate those identities with me, someone that they already kind of had a loving relationship with, it created space for them to be able to confront that in a really human way. That's part of why I do the work that I do on the nonprofit side with my business partner. She's actually an ordained Methodist clergy person. So it is super rare to have a spiritual queer person and an ordained Methodist clergy person come together and say, how do we create holistic pathways for healing and connectedness? And I think we are really dedicated to systemic change from the inside out. So we specifically partner with churches It is rare to see queer organizations partnering with churches as well, but we really think that that's an important part of the reformation of the church, of how do we take all of these white Christian nationalist, patriarchal, colonial things that have erased Indigenous, BIPOC, and queer identities throughout our entire country's histories, and how do we start to intentionally create community connections that are slow and intentional. So this has been a 5-year journey, because we know, at least the work we've done as white individuals, is like, we are not trying to enforce our timelines on anyone else, but how do we like really intentionally get connected with our community stakeholders to build relationships to reduce these types of stigmas. And so that type of inside work is not for everyone. I think a lot of queer and BIPOC folks do a ton of emotional labor that they shouldn't always have to do. And so I think part of our charge too is like, how do we help coach people really slowly to deconstruct those internalized biases if they have all these held privileges and money and resource and time on their hands, to say like, hey, what does it look like for y'all to do this work? Because we know who has been the canary in the mines for years. So I think I said a lot of different things, but I think for me, it's like that closeness, that connection. For those of us who have the bandwidth to carry that load and do that emotional labor, I think that's what's needed right now to build bridges.
Ooh, ooh, building bridges. Oh my goodness, we just started, y'all. We just started. So building bridges. I want to step on building bridges for a moment, and Cheryl, please feel free to dive in.
I'm with you. Go ahead.
So one of the biggest things is we're speaking similar language. We live in it. We're part of it as allies, as advocates. So we understand it and know. There's a lot of people listening that has no idea what you two were sharing, because they may hear the terms, but they don't know what it means. So if you two could share with us like an introduction, one-on-one, what's LGBTQI 101? Like if we were just to go in to learn, what does this look like? Because a lot of people never had a conversation like this. Like you said, proximity, this is the closest for some people to have access to learn. So some of the terms that you mentioned, I want to bring up, I want to highlight. Number one, y'all both got out of Texas. That says something. That says a whole lot. The second is
Lived there my whole life too.
wow. It says a whole lot. I mean, that's another show. That's another show. That's another show. But what I heard was cisgender, transitioning, trans man, trans woman, passing, queer, polyamorous, neurodivergence, coming out. These are terms that may be norm within the community, but outside of the community, people don't know. And part of this show is for exposure, for people to begin to be educated so we can start building a bridge. So if y'all could introduce the audience, or educate the audience, the listeners, to what does these things mean?
Yeah, I can tell you like what my story was, and that hits a lot of them. So I knew probably I've known all my life, but I really kind of knew when I was in my 20s, and I worked for an HIV charity, and this was mid 90s, so it was the Dissons, at the time, and I met somebody's partner, and she was a trans woman. And I asked her because I thought I might be trans, right? And I asked her, and she said, "Oh no, you'd be obsessed with it." So I just ignored it for a long time. And then I met a pastor that was trans, which is interesting. And I was like, "Oh, I can actually do this." Okay, so that's what I started doing. So I'm a trans man, so I was born female. That's a process. We're actually lucky in the sense that trans women have to take a lot more like hormones and stuff like that. I just take a testosterone shot. I did it this morning, actually, once a week. And then I had top surgery and I had some facial stuff. A lot of trans men don't have bottom surgery for a lot of reasons. It's not really very advanced, and they have to take all the skin off of your arm, and it's just not, it doesn't seem great to me for the outcome. And some people, I actually didn't realize this until I kind of started getting into the trans community. There's actually a third group, right? So there's women that transition to men, and then men that transition to women, or, however you'd like to phrase that. And then there are people in the middle that are non-binary, and they're happy to be there, right? It's not that they're going one way or the other. That's just where they are. And I didn't really understand that. I don't know if I truly really understand it, but I understand that it's there. And I feel like that's I'm going to preach, but that's my solution to this whole problem, is to say, I don't understand that. That's not a problem. It exists. That's my solution to pretty much everything in my life. You know, everybody is actually consenting. It exists. I don't care. I mean, I being in psychology, I'm probably going to ask some questions because I'm interested. But in long term, it doesn't really matter. You know.
Powerful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I can jump in as a non-binary individual. So I agree with what you said, Winter. I think when we think of the spectrum of humanity, anytime we bump it, sometimes people, like I had a student say, why do we have to have a letter for everything now? So when we go back to the acronym, LGBTQIA2S+, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, Q, queer. I have to like slow it down in my brain.
Me too.
Transgender, intersex, asexual, two-spirited, which honors our indigenous folks as well in our country, and then plus, right? So all of the other names that we've developed. And so the first thing I remind folks is like, you don't have to have the dictionary in your head. I think what Winter said is so lovely. Like, it's okay to not know and it's okay to be curious. What I think happens though is we kind of are in a culture where like, if you don't know something, you're penalized, and curiosity then turns into discomfort and then sometimes into guilt and shame. And I think that's what shuts people down, where then they start just being in a very different posture, right? So I would just always remind people, it's okay to not know, it's okay to be curious, and it's okay just to have a posture of like, help me learn. And if you don't want to help me learn, can you point me in the direction of where I can do some of this learning? So that's kind of the acronym. I think Winter touched on like, you know, we have assigned female or assigned male at birth. So we talk about our sex characteristics. We have primary sex characteristics. That's like vaginas, penises, breasts. And then we have secondary sex characteristics. That can be like facial hair, chest hair, muscle disposition, fat distribution, things like that, right? And so all of those things are kind of our genetic makeup, which is different than our gender identity. So our gender identity, we know, is a social construct. So like we make it up. We make up all the rules about how we self-describe ourselves as human beings. And so the very first place I always start with folks is saying, you know, there are billions of us on this planet, and there's billions of ways to be a human. And even medically, with intersex folks, we know that biology is not a clean slate of one or the other. It doesn't exist in binaries. So why are we so concerned about putting people in binary boxes where you have to be this or you have to be that? And I think we can really clearly point to some historical roots of control of people and human bodies and reproduction and territories and all of those things is like why we're so invested in this binary way of being. But I always remind people we don't have to live into those legacies. We have like our true power as human beings, especially I think for queer folks, we get to reimagine that human experience. So cisgender just refers to people who were assigned maybe female or male at birth and their gender identity aligns with that. Transmasc, trans female, non-binary means our gender identity doesn't align with what we were assigned at birth, and we have this freedom of expression. And as Winter said, with that freedom of expression, sometimes comes a lot of like harm, discrimination, especially if you're visibly queer. And so, yeah, I think both and. Does that kind of help touch on all of the definitions for folks?
Absolutely. Y'all just gave a crash course. Like, you just helped a lot of people.
I wanted
to a lot of people.
I wanted to ride on what Liz said too about not overreacting, and I think part of that may be youth and stuff like that, because I know I've done animal welfare stuff since I went vegetarian in '93, and when I was younger, I was really obnoxious about it, and now I am not obnoxious about it. So that may be part of it. But when I moved here, I went to a dermatologist, and the dermatologist, here's one of those underlying little microaggressions, I think is what they're called, refused to put my name down as male. And so the prescription I got went to my pharmacy, and they were so tiptoeing around, we know you're male, you get testosterone, whatever, but this doctor put this in. And I was like, you don't have to do that with me. Just say there was this mistake, and I'll tell you, yeah, that was a mistake and you're right. So,
and some people out there may not even, that's what a microaggression is sometimes, unknowingly saying, doing, being, in the space that's really at the foundation of our own bias, our own values, our own worldview. And so I'm just curious, what are some of the other ways that people can trip over some of those biases that you've either experienced or that you're aware of?
Pronouns can be a big one, and I always tell people, like, be gentle with yourself, right? We are conditioned to think about things again in that binary he, she. And so when our brains see something, our brains are really, really good at just categorizing things, and we get really efficient at putting people in the boxes that we were socialized to believe they exist in. And so when we see someone who we code as more female or we code as more male, we're really likely to default to those pronouns that we use, right? Kind of twofold. Like, one, getting used, especially if you're a cisgender person and you want to start like leaning into more active allyship, introduce yourself with your pronouns. That really helps say, like, yeah, maybe you coded me this way and these are my pronouns, but don't assume that's the case. I think we can just like slow down and just like make a little bit less assumptions about the human experience, right? And so pronouns are a big one. And then if you trip up, a lot of folks want to apologize and say, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. Just correct it. I always tell people, you don't need to apologize. Just say, oh, Liz, they, and then like keep it moving, right? Different trans and non-binary folks feel differently about this, so I'll only speak to my experience. I tend to have a pretty high bandwidth for being mispronounced, especially from folks who don't know me well, right? Or folks like one of my best friends, she's super ADHD, and like she's often talking directly to me, not talking about me, so she's not often using they, them pronouns referring to me, and so she trips up a lot. And she and I occasionally will touch base and she'll be like, hey, I know that I often still use she, her pronouns. I'm like, Emily, you've known me for literally a decade. I understand, and you're not talking about me very often. So I tend to always center the relationship first. If someone's intent is to be affirming, I tend to see the intent. And my invitation is to like see the best intents with each other. And I think that helps soften everything because we're just all learning. So I think pronouns are where a lot of microaggressions happen. Sometimes, I don't know if this is a microaggression or just like invasive, because we just said it's okay to not know things, and it's okay to be curious. Some things you don't need to be curious about, right? I'll give a really concrete example. If you're not walking around to your cisgender friends, being like, oh, so what is your anatomy like? You don't ask what? So don't ask your trans friends that, right? And so sometimes I don't want to shame anyone who does have those curiosities, but unless you're in a close, intimate relationship with someone, you should never be asking about people's genitalia. You wouldn't do that with your normal friends. Don't do that with your LGBTQ friends, unless they've invited that in, unless that's part of the nature of your connection. Again, there's lots of avenues to learn what those transition surgeries are like, videos, medical documents. So if you really have these burning questions, there are good ways to get those answers without maybe like overstepping some of those boundaries. So there's a difference between like curiosity and maybe like where curiosity meets healthy boundaries as well. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say those are just such great examples that are really helpful for the individual who's saying, gosh, I don't want to make any mistakes. I don't want to, I want to be respectful, but I'm just, what are those ways that I might trip over? And you gave such grace to everyone saying this is a relationship. We're learning together. Liz had said you have the bandwidth to hold that space for somebody who's just learning and wanting to be more of an ally.
So I'm curious. This conversation is so needed, so necessary, and I appreciate you both because these are conversations that we don't get to have publicly in this brave space, and you all have created that for us because of this perspective of curiosity. Like, let's talk about it. Let's find out what works. Let's build the bridge, and I'm standing on that because it's so great to connect us. And I want to go deeper because we are already in the basement. Like you mentioned it earlier,
That's
Liz.
right.
This is literally in the
Let's
basement.
go.
And we're here for it. We're here for it. So with that, I gotta explain it so we can go deeper. I have this house analogy. We use this house analogy on the show where there's three parallels: who we were, who we are, who we're becoming. That's who we are as a person. And then the house is our perspective, such as the attic, the living room, the basement. So the attic is where we spend most of our time, which is in our head. Then we have the living room, which is where we are presently, but I can't be present if I'm worried about the future or the past. And then we have the basement. The basement is where all the gook is, all the junk, all the stuff that happened to us from birth till now. We stuff in that basement. We don't go down there. But for you two, because of the work that y'all have done, you have no problem going into the basement and talking about these things with confidence, y'all not sweating at all, at all. So I want to go deeper related to these topics that I heard related to what does it mean to be queer? What is that? What is that about? What does it mean? What is polyamorous? Because these are also terms that a lot of people don't get a chance to talk about because they're not connected to people who talk about these terms. And you two have a way of breaking things down to make it simple, to make it applicable where we can understand it. And the last one was coming out. So these are terms that are really highlighted within the community. If you could share with our listeners more information about those.
I'm asexual, so I can get that one. Polyamory is another one where I'm like, it exists. I don't get it. So that's probably coming out may be a different thing for you, because for me, I collect weird people. I mean, none of my friends are normal people. So they just kind of went, all right.
Yeah.
So
yeah, totally. So talk about asexual, and then I can talk about coming out and polyamory for sure.
Okay, yeah, there's a asexual. I've been this way literally my whole life. My dad used to make fun of me and tell me I was going to be a nun. I just am not interested in other people that way, and it's just not there. One of my favorite movies is The Shining. There's a scene where he sees a beautiful woman in a bathtub, right? Jack Nicholson. And he sees this beautiful woman in a bathtub, and you can just see that lust in his eyes, And so I think about that when I think about what other people feel. Probably not that bad all the time because he's not a great guy, but I've just never felt that. When I hear about people talking about how, I don't know if we can cuss, how someone has a really nice butt, or, they look like they're well endowed or something.
Yeah.
That, to me, that's kind of a technical thing. It's like, oh, all right. Whatever. And that's really hard for people because, well, I have a lot of female friends. So I'm sure my neighbors, a couple of them came up here from Texas for the anniversary of something really horrible that happened to my friend. I just try to keep her out of Texas during that. And so I'm sure my neighbors are thinking, I've got a threesome going or something. And I'm like, no, they're in the basement. It's fine. I actually don't like to be around too many people. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't enjoy some forms of things that are sexual. It's just generally not with another person. And I know that there are some asexual people that like, they like to cuddle and stuff like that, just not have sex. I don't, but that's another thing where it's just personal. We actually had someone that used to work here, and she was my friend, and I did a lecture, and she was like, God, it would be so interesting to talk to someone that was asexual and someone that was trans. And I was like, wonder why. So we had that conversation without me saying, that's me. So yeah.
I think too, something that's so helpful that you're kind of delineating, Winter, is like the difference between gender identity, sexual orientation, and then romantic orientation. So someone can be asexual but still enjoy romance. Someone could be aromantic and asexual and just be like, I don't know about this human connection thing. And that's totally fine too. So the really beautiful part about coming up with more terms to capture more nuanced experiences is just to say, like, it's okay to exist as you are. I'm kind of closing the loop on something that I said earlier. I think I lost the thread of where I had a student say, why do we need so many terms? We need terms for two reasons. Like, one, for visibility, because all of these held identities and lived experiences have been so suppressed and subjugated by dominant narratives of people in power that having language is a way of resisting that and saying, no, we're here and we get to take up space. And this isn't a pie, right? Like, I always go back to the pie analogy of like, us having some pie is not taking away from your portion of the pie. There's enough pie to go around. Building off of the terms of asexual, though, coming out really just captures, coming out as a highly unique process because people come out again with their gender identity, sexual identity, and sometimes romantic identities. There's also social transitions and medical transitions, and not everyone opts into all aspects of both. So when we think about social transitions, that can be like coming out with your friends, with your family, with your partners, in your workplace settings, in public forums. So I would say as an individual, all of my identities are fully out across all areas that I embody. That is because I choose to take on that level of risk, right? Because I am a person who believes in having these educational roles and doing that type of labor because that's how I create advocacy for the communities I'm a part of. It is not safe for people to come out because, as Dr. Fisher said at the beginning, all of the news headlines, right, adding to some of the ones you listed, just reversed in Colorado, where now conversion therapy is legal once again.
Didn't get to that one. Yep.
I was actually going to say conversion therapy. You can suppress this stuff as much as you want. I grew up in Texas. I grew up as an evangelical Christian for a long time because I grew up in Texas. And so I said, oh, these things aren't true, right? And they just have stayed this way. You know, my friend that I've known since we were in 8th grade, she was like, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense. It's always been there and it's never going to go away in my experience. And I've known people that have been through conversion therapy because I used to live in Texas. And sure enough, they just hate themselves more, you know? So
we are in the basement. So let's continue this energy in the basement. Conversion therapy, if you can expose, educate listeners,
Yes.
what is conversion therapy? What goes on in that experience?
Yeah. And one thing I want to jump on what Winter just said too is like when folks transition and then hate themselves more, it's not because they're not living with their authentic identity. It's because the systematic barriers, the systematic discrimination that then they're experiencing due to transitioning causes them to internalize all of this pressure and then want to detransition. So we want to like be really nuanced in how we talk about why detransitioning happens in our society and how it's a byproduct of incredible violence against trans folks. Conversion therapy, though, is where you believe you can take someone who's gay and make them straight. And so it is, or trans and make them cisgender, right? And so conversion therapy is the belief that you can reform people's identities. And this is really rooted in our deepest white colonial tendencies of like erasing indigenous culture. So anytime we think about like Reformation schools, that's anytime we're stripping people of their languages, their identities, their self-expression, who they are, and saying, no, you have to fit again into this very binary box in order to be accepted by dominant culture and society.
Yeah, I was meaning people that like had those feelings and had just never acted on them yet, and you know went to conversion therapy because they didn't like them. This is sort of a long story. When I went to church, it was when I was getting to more liberal churches, so I guess that's better. There was a woman there who was really kind of masculine and everything, and everybody thought I was a lesbian until I transitioned. So she came to tell me her story, and her story was that she had been a lesbian and she had all these things that she experienced. And then one day there was a fire in her neighborhood and she met this man. She'd been praying, of course, and she met this man and she was like, that's my future husband. And that's a real common kind of story. But then she said, and my parents told me I had this thing and that I'd never menstruate, and that I was always kind of going to look sort of, masculine. And I was like, okay, let me, I taught sex ed forever. So I was like, let me ask some questions about this. And I think she had Klinefelters. And so she thinks that is a horrible thing she has to get over, and it's not. My answer was there's nothing wrong with you. So that's how that can manifest like in a church setting. But conversion therapy, my master's was we did assessment and behavioral stuff. And so I understand the way that conditioning works. I've got a cat that I've trained to do this really cute trick, but a lot of times that's what it is. It's just operant conditioning. So we're going to put you, actually it could almost be negative reinforcement. Anyway. Yeah, we're going to put you in a situation where maybe you're looking, let's say a man, that they tend to get more, a cis man, you're looking at gay porn, right? And we're going to have something happen to you that you don't like. And I don't know exactly how it's done. I know in the past they used to do really horrible things, like think Clockwork Orange, kind of really horrible.
Yeah, and shock therapy.
And yeah. They say they don't do that anymore, but of course they would say they don't do that anymore, But it's just strict operant conditioning. And what happens with operant conditioning, again, with my cat that I'm training, is if I don't give him a reward every time he does his trick, he's going to stop doing his trick, right? And so what happens is someone gets out and they're then rewarded by their natural tendencies to, look at, say, gay porn or, get into a homosexual relationship or something like that. And then they feel like they failed too. And it's just because conditioning wears off, after a while, and it shouldn't have been done anyway, but it's always set up to fail. I mean, they think it's not, but yeah, it's always set up to fail.
Even more, this episode has so many layers. You all are sharing so many layers, and I'm thankful because we have this platform to share it in a way that is brave, that is safe, it's protection, and you all get to share that truth. And I want to go even further because Liz, you mentioned about taking on a level of risk. And for you to be fully out in all places and spaces, to me, what I heard is therapy. You've done a lot of work. You've done a lot of work in order to do that. And for both of you, I'm curious, especially deciding to live life on your own term, regardless of systematic issues. I'm sure it took a lot. So how did you get to this place of, I'm okay with me, you gonna have to adjust? How did y'all do it? How did y'all get here?
As I answer that too, if I can, this is like this is my ADHD/autism organization. If I can, like, do you want me to close the loop on the polyamory piece as well? Because that is part of my coming out and how I got to.
Yes.
Get us right. Get us together now.
There's so many nuggets today. So many nuggets.
Okay, let me give like the definitional term then of how I embody polyamory. Polyamory, different than polygamy. Sometimes people confuse those two terms. Polygamy is where you as an individual believe you can have multiple spouses. Typically that's tied to really specific gendered norms of a male having multiple wives. That is not polyamory. Polyamory falls under the ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy umbrella. And there's a lot of different forms of ENM or CNM, including swinging, having open relationships, and then having true polyamorous relationships. And I don't say like true polyamorous. Swinging is also a very legitimate form to have relationships, but like polyamory, we think about having multiple partners ethically, right? So I'm going to date these two people, and the analogy I always use is friendship. We never say you can only have one best friend. Well, maybe some people say that, but you can never have just one best friend. And so it's like, well, if you believe, and this is kind of what got me there, I was like, well, I have 3 best friends that I love with the same level of depth, but the nature of our friendships are all slightly different. And so I was like, why I'm not going to say, oh, Amanda, I love you more than Emily, or Emily, I love you more than Maria. I love all 3 of you equally at the same depth in different ways because they're all unique people. So we have unique connections. And the only thing that sometimes, but not always changes with polyamory is sometimes the sexual component, right? Of like, oh, I have all these 3 people that I love at the same depth, and I may have different sexual or romantic intimacy with those people as well. And so I think that really helps destigmatize what it means. And there's a lot of work that goes in. We live in a very monogamous society that really emphasizes one romantic partnership over all other relationships. And so like, even if you're monogamous, meaning you just want to date one person, there's still a way to deconstruct monogamy where you say, well, my partner isn't going to be on a hierarchy over my best friend of 14 years, right? Like me and one of my best friends, we self-describe as platonic life partners. That's me and my friend Amanda. And so as she has found her partner, we still talk about like, how are we going to uphold our business, our dream to live on a farm together, to co-live in community, and that doesn't get deprioritized just because she's suddenly in a 3-month-old romantic relationship. But in some monogamous connections, that does happen, right? So deconstructing monogamy gives people a lot of language, regardless of if you believe in multiple romantic or sexual partnerships, to really think about how do you prioritize the humans you say you're in sustainable relationship with. Does that help? I was maybe like, I'm going to try to hang on to that language myself. I think that helped.
It was wonderful. I had somebody explain to me their particular polyamorous relationships as this particular partner meets my physical needs, this particular partner meets my emotional needs, and we all work together to raise the children that we have. And it was just such a beautiful example of how relationship can be so much more diverse than this black and white thinking, all or nothing, monogamous relationship. So thank you so much for sharing that.
You brought up an interesting point too, is that marriage works. I didn't really realize this until fairly recently. Marriage is not always the way you think it is, right? So I used to show cats, and one of the judges was clearly gay. Okay, I mean, just really gay. He brought his wife one day, and I was like, what the hell? And it turns out they love each other very, very much. They just don't like to have sex. and so that's a thing. And I have a cis male friend who is in polyamory, and when that happens, sometimes I think they think the man is dominant because he has I think he has all female partners, but he's very picky. Like, he had someone that wanted to be in their group that he felt like hadn't really thought it out, so he made her go to therapy for a month and said, "Oh, okay, you get it. All right, that's fine." But he really wanted to make sure you really understand the way that this is going to work.
I was just going to say there's a lot of relational ethics that come into play, but I think that's just a good template for all relationships.
Yeah.
So I was just going to kind of circle back to where Jason was starting talking about, getting support. And Winter, you talked about somebody really seeking therapy to process and discern. So tell us a little bit more about that experience of seeking support, especially in light of all of these things that we found out, the defunding of support. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, for me, I don't think I had to, but I went to therapy for a couple of years just to deal with it. I had a real hard time finding a therapist too, but Texas, right? For me, I have a lot of online communities, and so that's really where I get more of my support than in person, which works out great because I mean, I know my neighbors and Jess, but that's all the people that I know up here. I'm also very low on social needs, and so that probably helps also. I have a lot of weird things about me. Like Liz said, I'm also autistic, and I was diagnosed as an adult, and I practice a minority religion, and I've just got all of these weird things about me, so I'm used to just being kind of just myself, and if people like it, then that's fine. So I'm more independent, I guess, than a lot of people, and benefits me in some ways, but it can also, I understand that other people, this is another one of those things, just understand the way other people are and don't worry about it. I understand that connection is more important to a lot of other people than it is to me. So I kind of live a different experience than most people's.
When I think about instrumental support, it does vary widely across what different queer folks need, so very similar to what Winter is saying. And I'll kind of bring in, I keep referencing like religious pieces, white Christian nationalism pieces. That's because those are the waters I've swam in my whole life since I was 15 as well. And so I wanted to share in the chat just one resource too. It's called 1946, The Mistranslation That Shifted Culture. It's a documentary that goes into how homosexual as a word was never actually in the Bible, and that was translated by a small group of 8 white men, and it got popularized in one version of the Bible here in America, and it really did shift the culture, right? So whenever I think about how do we help support people in the queer community, help get them connected, there's kind of multiple avenues I think about, one of which is education. Education is always a pathway to liberation. And by giving people good information where they see themselves represented in social media, in history, in art, in all of these beautiful places, it really helps liberate people's mindset to say, oh, there are people like me and I'm not existing in isolation. And I think that helps it be a little bit less scary. And even if you go through years of therapy, it might not be safe to be out in certain spaces, right? You could literally be fired in some states. It is legal to lose your job. It is legal. And I think really unfortunately, we're already seeing that people are being empowered to legally kidnap and place folks in concentration camps again, right? And now trans folks this last week were put on the terrorist list because we are anti-American. And so we can see all of this rhetoric that is nothing new. This is the same rhetoric that has been used across the African continent, in Germany, and here in the Americas, to subjugate people always by other, especially white colonial folks in power, right? And so I always want to say, like, even if you go to years of therapy, you might have a very different outcome than someone like me who is willing to be out openly, and that's totally okay. That is not a failing. It doesn't mean you're not living authentically. It means you're aware of the structures in place that prevent you from living authentically. And then we talk about how do we find safe, private places where you can be your most authentic self that are away from these prying eyes of those who could really cause serious harm and or kill you. And I think that's a reality that we've always bumped into, but we're just seeing, I think sometimes media just gives us more access to see what has always kind of been there. And so online forums, video games, role play games, like RPGs, Dungeons and Dragons, all of these things that let people find community, often really nerdy community. There's a huge overlap between nerdiness and I think queerness and neurodiversity, which is so beautiful. That gives people safe places to say, okay, in this private space, I can be who I want to be really safely. Online forums have really shifted and really helped people find community connection, especially if they're in rural places like Iowa, Texas, other Midwest states, where there's a lot of active discrimination and a lack of providers, right? And so folks are getting really creative of how do I find other people like me to connect with? And we see more long distance romantic dating than ever before. And I think it's because people can finally connect with other queer folks and be like, wait, you do like me for me, and I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not. And we can have this really lovely connection. And then anytime that it's possible, I do really advocate for, especially for a lot of most of the queer folks I work with have some sort of religious trauma. I heard this great quote that even to exit religion in America is a religious experience because it's so in the waters that we swim in. So for me, I'm always really attuned to what are the religious traumas that queer folks have. And a lot of queer folks really long for spiritual community, but don't have a template for that because our dominant spiritual communities and religious communities have been really anti-LGBTQ for most of their history and continue to be in some parts. And so I'm always thinking, like, how can we connect folks in spiritual spaces that are safe, that allow them to figure out what spiritual and religious rituals look like that are really meaningful, that are maybe deconstructed from those dominant courses. So there's like multiple pathways: education, online forums, community forums, sometimes spiritual forums. And then I also think medical. We have a huge medical need right now, both mental health and physical health needs. We are seeing folks being at risk for losing their license if they provide gender affirming care or sexual orientation affirming care. And so now we also have folks saying, do I risk my career to provide these services? Again, I'm a person who says, yes, I will. But I think when we think about what it means to live authentically, that just has to look different for different folks. So for me, I have made a very clear decision that if I get arrested, if I lose my license, if something happens that harms me physically, I'm okay with that because I am choosing to say that we need people who are willing to be on the front lines. And I don't think everyone needs to be on the front lines, should be on the front lines, because we also need healers and weavers. There's this beautiful last thing I'll say on this, there's this beautiful template of what community activist looks like by Deepa Ira, and she says we all hold different roles. Some of us are disruptors, some of us are first-line responders, some of us are storytellers, some of us are caregivers, some of us are healers. And so I choose to be a first-line responder, I choose to be a disruptor, I choose to be a healer, but we have so many other roles that are just as instrumental for keeping our communities going. We need someone who stays safe behind those front lines to carry our legacy stories, to pass them on. We saw through the AIDS crisis that so many queer folks died, and we don't have a lot of older queer folks to mentor us. We need to retain folks to be our mentors and our legacy holders. So I think it's just that gentle reminder that whatever activism looks like for each of us individually, it's just as valid. And it's easy to say external activism is easy to point to, but that doesn't make it more meaningful than other forms of it, if that makes sense.
So my research is in ancestral wisdom and intergenerational trauma recovery. And as
Wow.
a healing model, we understand it to be multi-leveled. And as you're
Yeah.
describing this, we talk about trauma isn't an individual healing process. It's a collective process. It's a reconnection process. It's a political process. It's a societal process, and both human and more than human existences. And so as you were describing what support looks like and community looks like, I just had to reference that this idea of being present for our LGBTQ2 plus IA, and I know I just mixed it up.
That's totally
And I
fine.
mean to encompass everyone is bigger and broader than just sitting across from the individual and saying, gosh, what do you need? There's so much more that we need to be aware of. And I love your invitation for the varied ways that we can step up and be supporters and helpers and healers and advocates. So thank you, Liz.
You and I could probably talk a whole lot about paganism and a lot of traditional
Oh.
religions in terms of modern stuff, because that's my minority religion. So, but one of the things you mentioned, religion and the way that the Bible's mistranslated and stuff. I have a good friend, he built a house in France, he bought a field and now there is a house there. And everyone that meets him, and I thought this too, thinks that he's gay. He used to be Pentecostal. He's moved on to Catholicism, which is really a good step. And he really went to one of those weird evangelical churches for a long time. He's kind of progressing. I don't think he's ever going to get there, but he had a cousin that got married to a man. And so he kept a picture of them kissing on his fridge so that he would get used to the idea, of that, and he would be okay at the wedding, which I thought was really, sweet of him. But I hate to see how that's mistranslated because it affects so many people. I listened to a biblical scholar named Dan McClellan, and he's amazing. He's very famous, but he's also on YouTube all the time. But one of the things that he mentions is the Levitical law. If you are a Christian or you are a Jewish person, it applies to you. It does not apply to everyone else in the world. If you really believe that, okay, it's you that has to follow those rules. It's not the rest of the world. It's just you. So I think that's important as well.
Very powerful. Very powerful. So we got a couple minutes left. And what I want to do, last two questions, because this episode just went. It just went. Any final thoughts, anything that you want to share, especially for new clinicians, for seasoned clinicians, how to show up for people that's part of LGBTQIA plus community. And number two, if people want to continue this conversation, want to get in contact with you, see what you're doing, get connected. How can people get connected? So final thoughts, and then how can people connect with you?
Final thoughts for me are to really remember that trans folks make up about 1% of the population. Queer folks make up 5 to 15% of the population. We know that those numbers aren't fully accurate because we have to hide our identities, but we are not interested in controlling cisgender heterosexual folks the way that they're interested in controlling us. I always want to just remind people, why are you so interested in controlling what people do in their very private life? And how is that a reflection of your own insecurity or need to be maybe more self-compassionate and self-loving with yourself as a human being, that you can't even embrace other people being different than you? And for clinicians that are entering into this work, I think a lot of new clinicians are really scared of doing harm, and that's a beautiful place to start, and they're scared of getting stuff wrong. And I would say you will make a mistake. We all do. I have made so many mistakes in my decade of being a therapist and being a professor, and that's okay. It's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about saying, when they happen, apologize in earnest. Make your relational pair say, I hear that this was harmful to you. While that's not my intent, my actions caused harm and I am accountable for my actions. And so moving forward, I make a commitment to go and educate myself a little bit more and be really mindful of how this impacted you and change my behaviors. That's it. We sometimes get so anxious and stuck in our shame and guilt about apologizing, but we're just humans. We're going to make mistakes. We're just humans. And then educate yourself. There's so many books. There's so many professors that are really dedicated to doing this type of work. And so you can reach out to me at my Alliant email, which is just elizabeth.waters@alliant.edu. Always happy to meet during my office hours, have these conversations, share resources. Similar to Winter, I teach sex therapy every summer for our Alliant students, our CFT students at least. So I have PowerPoint slides that go over all the different terminologies. I have PowerPoint slides about how to conduct a psychosocial assessment for the folks that are medically transitioning. So happy to just share those with anybody because, again, I think education is liberation. And so please don't hesitate to reach out and just be a lifelong learner because that's what we're here to do. We are here for a short time, not a long time. So let's just try to be gentle with ourselves.
One of the things that you all would know if this is actually a problem, but I told you about my friend that had this horrible thing happen to her and she got stuck, which I'm irritated with another friend for not telling me that. But anyway, I decided I had sent her websites of therapists and said, some of these people, and she just couldn't do it. So I was like, okay, this is my problem now. So I started looking for therapists for her. And I noticed a lot of them, it seemed like just this list of things that they said they did, right? And, it included everything. Trauma therapy was in there. And I would encourage therapists, if they're going to work with the diverse community, to really be sure that's what you want to do and then educate yourself first. And like I said, I don't know if that's actually a problem, but that was just something that I noticed. And I know that bias is an important thing. I had to talk about that in my dissertation, but learn, really look inside yourself and say, what biases might I have before you decide that you want to work with that community?
Totally.
Thank you both. Cheryl, final thoughts. Anything you got?
I'm speechless. Mic drop. These guys are amazing. I just want to thank you so much for bringing your whole self into this podcast. We really pride ourselves in making it inside the session, making it real and unscripted. And so, thank you for providing us with your whole selves and your truths. And so we can learn, and our audience can learn more about how to be supportive and how to just be kind human beings. Thank you.
Yes.
I love to lecture. I'm super happy to lecture. I love it. I don't know why. And then if people want to get in touch with me, it's just my name, winter.wiorkowski@alliant.edu. So
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you both so much. I feel the same way as Cheryl just mentioned. I share the exact same sentiments. I'm noticing that we just get our title from the episode, and the title that hits me the most, I need you to picture it. There's a huge rainbow over this over this title that says "Education is Liberation." And you two liberated us by educating us on the life that you all live and helping other people on this journey of discovering who they really are. And I really appreciate both of you. We really appreciate both of you because without these conversations, we cannot change, we cannot shift. So I believe from the bottom of my heart that you all were able to change somebody's life with the information that y'all shared today. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been another episode of Inside the Session. We hope you all enjoyed it. If you did not, rewind it, okay? Just rewind it, go back to it. This is digital. You got full access. Stop playing. If you missed something, get your notebook and go back through this episode. Now you have access to two people that's part of the community that don't mind educating, exposure. And even Winter mentioned lecturing. If you want an hour lecture one-on-one, he got you. They got you, okay? So thank you all so much for joining us. We'll be back at it next week, next month, next time, okay? See y'all there. Have a great day, great night, good life. Peace.